memorize them. They're the standard stuff, so it's all good. Thank you. All right, so last time we were talking about the inflammatory response. So we just generally said, okay, cells send out signals, right? But we didn't give any examples of any of the signals or anything like that. So these are some of the ones that you'll see mentioned in your book and ones that I expect you to be somewhat familiar with. I gotta sneeze. Apparently it doesn't want to come out. So one of the processes we're going to talk about is fever, right? And so this is where your core body temperature is increased. And there are some benefits to this, right, that we're going to talk about. But how it is that the body knows that it needs to increase temperature is chemical signals that are released in response to what's going on in the body. So IL is a common abbreviation for a set of cytokines that you'll see a lot. Does anyone know what IL stands for? Nope. It stands for interleukin. And thinking that we should probably spell it out, huh? Because it's not spelled out. We'll spell it out. So I hate that this is in the font that doesn't look like an I, but it's a capital I. So when I spell it out, it starts to make a little bit more sense, right? Inter, meaning what? Inside, or in this case, in between. So this is communication in between a particular set of cells, white blood cells, because what's another name for a white blood cell? Leukocyte, right? Which I usually caution students not to use that word because they confuse it with another word, lymphocyte, which are not the same, right? Although leukocyte means all your white blood cells. When someone says lymphocyte, they're talking about a particular group of white blood cells. So the terms are not synonymous. But it is important to know leukocyte means white blood cell. So this is communication between white blood cells. They're talking to each other. It's their own special little code, you could say. So as they discovered these cytokines that communicate in between white blood cells, they numbered them. So they named them interleukins and they numbered them. 1, 2, 3, I don't know, I think we're up to like 50 now. It's kind of crazy. So as you can imagine, IL-1 was the first one we discovered. And it is one of the players as it relates to fever. Right? So when this is released by our white blood cells or our cells, it's going to communicate fever. So is IL-6. And the other abbreviation that's here, I have to be out of presentation to write it out. Anyone know what TNF stands for? I'm going to spell this one wrong. No, I didn't. I think I got it right. Tumor necrosis factor. And so, of course, again, there's more than one, specifically the alpha, right? This is the Greek symbol for A, referred to as alpha. I don't need to write that one out, do I? Okay. It's all Greek to me. Just kidding. Okay. So ones that help and enhance inflammation is IL-8. So you'll see that one mentioned. So there are a lot of signals. Remember I said there were a lot of hormones, right? But we were going to be nice as far as cytokines go, and we were just going to mention a few. These are the few. Right? And as you read through the chapter, these will repeat. So remember, IL-1 and 6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha are fever-inducing cytokines. That's the most common thing that will happen when they're released. And inflammation, right, when IL-8 is released, that you're going to have an inflammatory response. So as it relates to inflammation, unfortunately, inflammation can be widespread, right? We want the whole one of the purposes of inflammation is to localize, right? To keep stuff in a particular area, right? So the troops go there, the white blood cells go there where the problem is. The problem is sometimes is the bad guys get out. They escape and they get onto the superhighway, which is our bloodstream. And they can travel to other parts of the body. And this can be really bad because now we've got stuff trying to go everywhere. And do we have enough troops to cover the whole front? Not really, right? And so these terms you probably heard before, right? But most of you probably didn't even know what it meant, right? Septic shock as versed to toxic shock. And so how are these terms related and what do they mean? So these are forms of systematic inflammation. So this is where it's not localized, right? We're not talking about, on your arm or on your leg. We're talking about system-wide. And this is when it can really be damaging. So the difference between septic versus toxic. Septic is typically what you'll see with a bacteria with an infection that's gone body-wide, right, system-wide. We're not talking about localized in one particular area. This can even be where, like I said, you'll find the bacteria in the blood because they've gotten from the tissue some area where the initial infection may have started and it's gone into the blood. And a lot of times they refer to this as someone has gone septic, right, where the infection is now present and even in the blood. This is really scary because the inflammatory response can then be widespread. But remember, how are the white blood cells getting to the area? The initial, through the blood vessels, right? So if you increase blood flow to multiple areas throughout the body, what happens to blood volume and blood flow? It drops, right? It can drop so significantly that it's referred to as being in shock, right? When someone is in shock, in general, it's a huge decrease in blood volume or blood pressure or both. The problem with that is you need pressure to get the blood where it needs to go, right? Your brain, especially, is kind of greedy when it comes to blood, right? Kind of needs to get its more than fair share. So when you don't have vital organs like the brain and the heart getting the blood supply that they need, then they stop functioning properly. So a lot of times when someone goes into shock, because this can be caused by numerous things, shock. They're going to address the main problem, which is the blood flow problem. They'll give something like a vasodilator to dilate the blood vessels, and one that will also increase heart rate. The most common is epinephrine, right? And that's why people who experience shock, sometimes what's referred to as anaphylactic shock, right? In that case, to an allergen that has gotten into their system widespread. That's just a Band-Aid, right? That's an initial fix to the problem of the blood flow issue. They must still go, if they have an epinephrine pen, they got to go to the hospital, right? And get additional supportive care and try and get at the root of the problem. So in the case of septic shock and toxic shock, these are really scary even when you finally go to the hospital because of the initial problem that's causing the shock. The fact that you have a bacterial infection that's gone that widespread, right? That's more than most modern medicine in most cases can handle. you have really truly a 50-50 shot when you go to the hospital and you are in septic shock, right? It's not uncommon that death rates are very high with this, right? Because it's progressed, unfortunately, to a huge problem, a huge problem. Toxic shock is being specific again in that it is a toxin that has gone, again, probably into the bloodstream and spread system-wide. So there are some bacteria that produce exotoxins, right? And this can happen where it goes system-wide. They sometimes use this for other toxins like venoms, like when you get bit by a snake or something like that. They'll say someone's it, but most of the time they say they're in anaphylactic shock. So of course, because it's inflammation, we see mediators that are commonly seen with inflammation, which is IL-1 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, which also is going to elicit a lot of times what? What did we just say? So if you have IL-1, yeah, fever. And that's a thing with bacteria too, is that a lot of them, unfortunately, they produce substances that initiate fever response in us. So we're not initiating the fever response, they are, right? So they're releasing these chemicals that cause us to release the cytokines that are associated with fever. So this is why a lot of times with a bacterial infection, you get fever. You get fever from your body responding and recognizing that there's a foreign invader and fever may be helpful, but also the bacteria are kind of hijacking our system. And that's why when you have prolonged fever that keeps going and increasing, it's a pretty sure sign that you're dealing with a bacterial infection. Right? Because they can override that system. They can make it go even hotter. And that's, again, a problem because it's going past what you have control over, right? They've hijacked the system. They're controlling it. They're saying get hot. And obviously, they probably adapted to the point where heat is not going to really affect them adversely, because then it'd be really stupid, right? To heat you up, and they killed themselves. So in this system of recognition, for your innate, where we're not saying, hey, that's E. coli 0157 that just got in. This is when we're saying, hey, bacteria just entered in. In general, these pathogens have general molecular patterns, right? Because remember, this is a molecular world. They're recognizing molecules. So that's why these are referred to as pathogen-associated molecular patterns. So there are some molecular patterns out there that are very common to pathogens. And because of that, evolutionary-wise, we have developed receptors right down to our DNA, right? We came with this pre-programmed from our parents, who came from their parents, and so on and so forth, because these were beneficial to have, because they were able to recognize these common patterns that we see with pathogens. So we refer to those pattern recognition receptors, right? Abbreviated PRRs, which I won't use the abbreviations, but people do. We start using these abbreviations and we forget what they stand for, right? Although it's much easier to probably say PAMPs. I will say pattern-associated molecular patterns. Okay. So, what are these? So, we find these in invertebrates and vertebrates, because remember, both have an innate immune response. Okay, so at this very basic level, pretty much all animals can do this, and even plants. But as I said, this is not specific. So for homework, I had you fill in, right, some of these boxes. So those boxes were for this particular set of receptors that fall in that category of pattern-associated pathogen. See? Associated molecular patterns. Right? So those pattern recognition receptors. So there's a group of them known as Toll-like receptors, because they're like these other compounds known as toll receptors. They're initially found in fruit fly embryos. So they talk about that. I think there's a paper in our book about it. So this first one, this toll-like receptor, which is a membrane bound in the plasma membrane receptor, what does this recognize? What does it say? Everybody together. Good morning. Lipotectonic acids. Right, so this is a molecule found on who? Gram-positive bacteria. Right? A lot of spirochetes have this. A lot of mycobacteria, because they're gram-positive as well. They have this common molecular pattern, right? These molecules. So they have found out that these receptors, Toll1 and Toll2, specifically recognize that substance, right? Lipotectonic acid. Do I expect you to memorize that Toll1 and Toll2 recognize lipotectonic acid? No. But I do expect you to recognize that lipotectonic acid, which is a general molecule found on a lot of gram-positives, is one of the patterns, one of the molecular patterns we're able to recognize. The other is lipopeptides. So these are fatty protein substances. Another one that's very common, what's Toll4 recognizing? LPS. What does that stand for? Lipopolysaccharide, remember that? And remember, that's the outer leaflet of all your gram-negatives. So in general, we're going to recognize gram-negatives. This also recognizes phospholipids of some protozoa. So again, this is very general, right? Lipopolysaccharide. What's the last one? Flagellin. That's the protein that makes up what? It says it in its name. Flagella. It's an easy one, right? But that protein is specific to bacteria flagella, right? So bacteria that have flagella, this receptor can recognize flagellin and say, bacteria, bacteria, right? So this is just receptors. They're just recognizing, right? They're like the eyes and the ears of our cells. And they're going, okay, there's a bacteria here. There's a bacteria here. Is that all they're going to do? Just keep saying, there's a bacteria here. There's a bacteria here. No, we want to send. We need to send this signal, right? So he says it to himself first, right? There are certain molecules within the cell that are going to send this signal to the command center, right? Which is the nucleus of our cell, where the DNA is. And that DNA codes for what cells can do. And one of the things this cell needs to do is send a signal to all its buddies, right? That, hey, bacteria are here. So they're going to transcribe pro-inflammatory cytokines, right? Like IL-8. They're going to actually make that substance and secrete it to tell all the cells nearby, right? Bacteria are here. We need to call in the reinforcements, right? We need an inflammatory response. We need all our white blood cell buddies here now. We need to eat up and destroy this bad guy. Now notice there's a group that are inside the cell within a vacuole, what we call an endosome. In general, what are these detecting and why are they on the inside instead of on the plasma membrane? In general, when you read those descriptions, what are we talking about? Viruses, right? So we're talking about double-stranded RNA viruses, right? So we don't have double-stranded RNA, did we? No, our RNA is single-stranded. So when double-stranded RNA gets inside of our cells, and that's, again, where viruses go, right, is inside. So we really got to have this detection inside. So when the virus comes inside, right, and that DNA comes inside, we have these receptors on the inside of our cells that go, uh-oh, virus. Right? Single-stranded RNA viruses. So again, even if it's single-stranded, we can tell a difference between our RNA and their RNA. Same is true with some DNA. Right? We modify our DNA in a particular way. We methylate it, right? So that we can tell that it's the old stuff versus the new stuff we're making. So if it's not methylated, it's probably not us, right? It's not our stuff. So in this case, again, we're going to send that signal to the nucleus. But in this case, it's not a bacteria, is it? It's a virus. And so the cell needs to know, hey, we need the virus attack mode, right? So they're going to release a set of information that says virus. And the most common group of signaling that happens is what are called interferons, right? And as the name implies, right, they're going to interfere with viruses because we don't want them doing what they want to do. Because that's bad news for us. That means death of our cells, right? Or damage, for sure. So understand these are general, right, patterns. We're not saying a specific bacteria like E. coli. We're saying a bacteria that's gram-negative, which happens to be E. coli, right, has gotten in. So I had a dog several years ago. I had him for 15 years. I raised him since he was 10 days old. He was pretty awesome. He was part Chow. If you know anything about that breed, they're very territorial. And so for him, you know, the yard was his domain and you were not crossing the fence into that yard. It just was not happening, not with him on guard. And one time I came up around the corner to my house. I didn't drive. I don't know why. I don't know what I was doing. I don't remember. It was a long time ago. But I was walking, and I went to open my gate, and my dog came at me, all poofed up, barking, like scared the EBGBs out of me. I was like, oh my God, right? And I was like, Blue, it's Mommy. And the minute he heard my voice, right, and saw my face, recognized me, he calmed right down. He's like, oh, okay. You're cool. You're Mommy. You're allowed in, right? I feel bad for anybody else who thought they were probably going to get into that yard. I was like, wow, yeah, he is good. And my friends all the time would be like, your dog is frightening. Please make sure your dog is away before we go into your house. And I had a general idea that he could be frightening. I experienced it one day by accident, that he was quite frightening. But, these are important things for our system in our body too, right? That they're able to recognize in a general way, right, that this isn't good, right? He also was really good at eating UPS packages, So it got thrown over the fence. He attacked. All my UPS boxes had bite marks in it. He even bit his own bed, so it didn't matter, right? It came over the fence, it was getting bit. So, so for our system, right, we have these barriers, right? Just like for our homes, right? You may have a fence, right? You may have a crazy, scary dog, right? You may have an alarm system. Just because we have all of these barriers doesn't mean stuff doesn't get in, right? And it doesn't mean stuff doesn't get recognized. And this is why we still see illness, right? So one of the first things we talked about in this was, well, if we have all this protection that we're going to talk about, how is it that we still get sick, right? Well, there are things that find their way past the fence and past the dog and past the alarm system, right? So for us, you know, we have the barrier. What's our first barrier, barriers that help protect us from stuff even getting in? What's our fence, our wall? Our skin. What else? Because we do have openings. Mucous membranes, right? And in those mucous membranes, there are substances that are even kind of like blue. They're going to kind of bite you, right? So what's found in that mucus that's going to help once the bacteria gets in and say gets stuck in that mucus, what's going to attack? What's going to attack it? So there are some acids in your stomach, yep. But what about in mucus? What about in mucus? It's found in mucus. That's literally an enzyme that can digest bacteria. Guys, I got to start studying this stuff. If you wait until 2 days before the test, there's going to be a whole lot of crying people. Nope. It eats peptidoglycan.
Oh no,
Lysozyme. Lysozyme. You're close. Lysozyme, right? And then we have defensins, these proteins that can insert into the membranes and disrupt them, right? That was last lecture. That wasn't even this PowerPoint. It was the one before that. Make sure you review those. Oh, what does lactoferrin do?
it activates iron.
Doesn't activate it. It binds to iron, right? And helps keep it away from the bacteria. It does what's referred to as sequester, right? It holds on to it so that the bacteria can't get it. And that's something else that's found in your mucus, right? That helps keep the iron away from the microbes because they need it for their metabolism. We don't want to just give them it freely. Yes, transferrin. So anything that ends in ferrin is referring to what? Iron, right? So all your ferrins are dealing with iron. So there's lactoferrin, transferrin, right? They're all proteins that bind to iron. And because of that, they help sequester it away from the microbes that also need it for their metabolism. So when we look at inflammation, right, the initial damage to the cells or also invasion is going to release those cytokines, right? So like IL-8, those cells are going to release that. Mast cells in the area may even release histamine that's going to really make these blood vessels permeable. So how is it that these guys, we see them here rolling along the surface? Why are they rolling along the endothelial lining of this blood vessel? Why are they doing that? They're starting to attach. Why are they starting to attach? What changes have happened in this area? Yeah, there's something got in, right? So we want to be able to get there to defend, right? So the blood flow is going to increase, but these cells actually got to know that this is where you need to exit. How do they know that that's where they need to exit? The little sensors tell them, right? So there are receptors that your endothelial cells are going to express in response to that signal from the neighboring cells saying, hey, we've got a problem here, right? They're going to express adhesion molecules that literally bind to the white blood cells, right? So they're literally grabbing on, that's why they roll, until they find a spot where they're going to squeeze through and then head into the area. Once they head into this area, what do they actually actively do? They phagocytosis, right? They're literally going to destroy, they're literally going to engulf and digest internally the bacteria in that area. Damaged cells, cell debris. Yeah, they're the big eaters. Macrophages, yeah, are the big eaters. These guys here, right? They eat a lot. Neutrophils eat too, and they're really good at killing. I forgot what I wanted to ask you guys. It popped out of my head. Anyone have a question about inflammation? Something that doesn't make sense to them? There was a key point that so what are the 4 cardinal signs of inflammation? How do you know you got inflammation going on? Redness, swelling, heat, pain, right? Okay, so why is it red? Increased blood flow. Why is it hot? Increased blood flow. Your blood is hot. Number 1, your blood is hot. Right? It absorbs most of the heat from the chemical reactions of your body. This is why when you start exercising, especially those of us that are fair-skinned, you can really see that we are generating a lot of heat and we need to get rid of it because we turn red, right? This is because of increased blood flow to your skin, increased surface area to get rid of that heat. So elephants do this in their ears. So this is why when you look at an Asian elephant versus an African elephant, their ears are dramatically different. Which ones do we have at our zoo here at Audubon? Asian. Believe it or not, their ears are tiny. Compared to African elephants have those big, huge ears. Why are they so much bigger than the Asian elephants? Yeah, it's a hot environment they live in, right? Africa as opposed to Asia, hot, right? So they need lots of surface area, right? Pump that blood, and then they even fan their ears, right? You see them out in the savannah in Africa, right? Fanning their ears. I don't know why we happen to have Asian ones here instead of African, but we do. Yeah, they probably would be okay here. I don't know why it is we have Asian versus African. I have no idea. But that's what we have at our zoo. But believe it or not, those ears are small compared to African elephants, right? So they're adapted to their environment, right? And to help them. So for us, right, so that we get hot, we get red, right? That's an increased blood flow. Then you guys also said swelling. Well, why does it swell? What?
Because of the extra fluid?
Right, because remember, when we make those blood vessels leaky so that the white blood cells can get out, we can't stop. It's like opening the floodgates. The fluid, a lot of the fluid from the blood leaks into the tissue. And this is why, too, think about this. If you have inflammation happening widespread, why does this drop your blood volume and pressure? All your fluids are going, right? So this is like when you have a water main break in the city. Forget about trying to take a shower, right? Ain't happening. No water pressure, right? It's like dribbling out the shower. You know what I'm talking about. You live in New Orleans. This has happened to you, hasn't it? Right? Yeah, you don't get to take a shower, right? Your body, on the other hand, your brain, your heart, not getting enough blood is a really serious problem, right? As opposed to low water pressure, right? Low blood pressure, to that extent, is deadly. Septic shock means that the cause was an infection that's gone system-wide. And shock means that you've had a significant decrease in blood volume or blood pressure, or both. So in that case, when they say shock, that's what they mean, is that drop in blood pressure, right? And the scary thing about that is, again, you're not getting blood where it needs to go to vital organs, and it can lead very easily and quickly lead to death, if not rectified. The problem is what caused it in the case of septic shock is a widespread bacterial infection. We can't just go in and like vacuum it out or something. You know what I mean? There's no quick fix to that. You know, when you get to that level, you know, that's why we have such high mortality rates. It's not that doctors suck. It's that, you know, it sucks that this situation got to that level that, you know, I mean, we're not Star Trek. Yeah, see, IV fluids, that's going to get the blood volume back up, and that's one of the things they're going to do, right? But the infection is the major problem, and we can't just like snap our fingers to eliminate that. You see what I mean by that? All right, I'm out of time? I probably am. Yep, okay. Have a good weekend. Don't get septic shock.